Coggeshall is a beautiful and not particularly small village in Essex. It's built along a road that's at least 2,000 years old. And for hundreds of years, like a lot of eastern English counties facing towards the continent, it made its money from a very profitable business: fabric. With nearly 300 listed buildings in Coggeshall, you can see how they spent all of that money from wool and silk and lace. But I'm not here to admire the view. I'm here to look for a witch. Longbridge in Coggeshall is very old, probably 800 years or so old. It's had alterations, but it would be recognisable to James Boys, the town's vicar from 1679 to 1725. He left a document telling us about a widow he visited in 1699. Widow Common was uneasy and melancholy because her husband had lately drowned in the well. He found her under a great disorder of mind, and her eyes stared with a certain fierceness. Then he referred to her reputation, the Common Report representing her as a witch. Over the following months, the widow was subjected several times to a dreadful ritual intended to test whether she was a witch. She was swum on this river, observed by what the account says were hundreds of onlookers. She was stripped naked, her thumbs tied to the opposite toes, and she was thrown into the water. The Woolpack was built in the 15th century. Now it's a Grade 1 listed building, and you can see it didn't look special till the early 20th century when it was restored. There are so many buildings like this in England with ancient structures hidden behind more recent fascias. So what can we say about witch trials, and on this one in particular? Why did Widow Coman get accused of witchcraft, and why then? Well, a lot leaks out between the lines of James Boy's account, and a lot of these details are very common in witch trials. So let's start with something she was supposed to have done. She was accused of making a neighbour lame.
Mr. Cox, being taken lame much about that time, and complaining of a pain in his knee, I began to think there might be something of truth in the report that she was a witch. His lameness came upon him as a sciatica, much about at the time he had in a passion said that she should not come and live by him.
So Mr. Cox didn't like her. He didn't want to live near her. And several other women said that they had overheard Widow Coman say that Mr. Cox should get lame and die. So they didn't like her either. They were willing to testify against her. Witch accusations often betray years of simmering resentment that finally explode. People didn't move around as much as we do. They were stuck with the social networks they had, and they didn't always like them. The second thing is that people knew what to expect. The Widow Coman's interrogation could easily be characterised as leading and harassing. James Boys is actually a little bit unself-conscious about it. If Mr. Cox was ill, then they thought she must have made a wax doll of him. But it was James Boys himself who had mentioned how she would cause injury with it.
What did you do to this hen? Did you stick pins into it?
And they wanted to know if she'd met the devil. Had he given her imps to be her evil-doing familiars?
I desired her to let me see them. She said they were all gone out. They were gone towards Colchester, and that they would not come back until after I was gone.
Thirdly, James Boys often makes reference to crowds or bystanders. It seems that the Widow Coman didn't get much privacy. On at least one night she was accompanied by 3 neighbours: Mary Cox, Martha Appleton and Susan Smith. As soon as she started to feel discomfort, they thought they knew what it was.
She nestled in the bed and grew very hot and uneasy. They desired her to tell them whether she had any imps, and whether at that time she was suckling of them. She suckled her imps with her own blood.
Widow Coman's speech wasn't always coherent. She would say irrational sentences, speak to herself, or suffer from uncontrollable fits of laughter. Well, this could be a sign of psychological distress, of course, or perhaps it was the only way of avoiding prolonged and repetitive interrogation. Fourthly, the widow Coman mentioned a missing kettle and some pillowcases. James Boyce thought that she was mad until he found out that her family had taken them. Her family was just taking her stuff.
She complained that her silver bodkin worth half a crown was not brought home.
It's clear that her family wanted her possessions. And remember, her husband had died recently, so perhaps he was her protector, or perhaps they suspected that she pushed him down the well. Either way, now she was alone, and the wolves were closing in. So, what do you do when you want to disempower a witch? Mr. Cox wanted Mrs. Coman's blood. Specifically, he wanted a small amount to nullify her power, and the crowd agreed with him.
He thought fit, by the persuasion of those present, to fetch blood of her, which he did by holding her hand and scratching her arms with his nails, and then dipped his handkerchief in the blood and carried it to his father's house, and there burnt it. But he told me it had not the usual smell of burnt linen.
The final time the widow Coman was swum was in December 1699.
They did several times, and she always swam like a cork, as hundreds can testify on oath. Soon after, whether by the cold she got in the water or by some other means, she fell very ill and died.
This is the interior of St Peter ad Vincula. It's the largest parish church in Essex. It's built in the Perpendicular style, which is kind of the last knockings of Gothic. You can tell that to have built such a magnificent structure, they must have had a lot of money, and money from around here all came from wool. This is the north side of the churchyard. It's beautifully kept now, but traditionally it was where you'd bury excommunicates, suicide, people who'd died unbaptised, and witches.
She was carried to the grave in an ignominious manner and buried on the north side of the churchyard upon the 27th of December 1699. Her next relation was under a terrible fear lest the imps be sent to her.